Introduction. In this unit, we will be discussing areas of concern to women, including male-female differences. That's what we've been doing for this whole unit. An abundance of research shows that we are all different, not better or worse, lesser or better, just different. If we can learn to work as a team, we can use these differences as a blessing. So the difference between males and females are meant to complement each other, not to be working in competition, pulling against each other. Capital B, the compassionate Jesus. The compassionate Jesus. Compassionate. Yes. Jesus. 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 Jesus.
Can you spell it?
Jesus. This is capital B, the compassionate Jesus. So Jesus goes in the blank. Have I lost you?
Sorry, I'll get it later.
Okay. Not only did Jesus understand the hearts of all mankind, according to John 2:23-25, but he also knew the pain and suffering of women and children throughout the ages. He brought the way, a restoration to the heart of Father God for those who were hurting. Without the openness for God to deal with us, we will never receive the full inheritance He wants to give us. So allow yourself to be His work in progress as we walk with Jesus our Lord. So it's a process, a progress, a step-by-step journey. It's not an instantaneous, finished in one gasp. It's a journey as we go through. Legally, it's finished and done. Remember, legally, when God looks at you, He sees Jesus. He sees the finished product. So He's not constantly comparing us with where we should be, ought to be, must be, have to be. He sees us as perfect in Jesus. So legally, we're perfect, but in experience, it's a process of getting better and better, going from glory to glory, more and more in His image every day. Capital C, body image, in search of the body perfect. In search of the body perfect. Number one, why do women struggle with their body image? Do we as women? Yes. Yes. In an era when women are supposed to be enjoying their new sexual equality, they still judge their bodies with unrealistic standards. The majority of women go through cycles of dieting, gaining weight, food fads, and fashion highs, perhaps even more than our mothers and grandmothers did before us. Billions of dollars are spent each year on cosmetics and hair products. The clothing industry produces fashions worn by skinny supermodels, enticing women with thin is beautiful. With all this money and fuss, most women still consider themselves far, far from perfect. So why then do women judge themselves so harshly? Good question. I remember back when I was in my 20s reading an article by the then superstars of the modeling industry. Do you suppose that was one of them that said, yes, I've got a perfect body? No, they all said, well, my nose is too big, my bottom's too big, my legs are too short, etc., etc., etc. So even when the most of the women, most of the people looking at them in a magazine, in a picture, would say that they were perfect, they still judge themselves very harshly. So there's something almost in women's nature that we do. We judge ourselves so harshly. So too, it's all about measuring sticks. Measuring sticks. It's all about measuring sticks. Women have developed an internal measuring stick, or the big MS, to judge themselves on a 1 to 10 scale. And where do these images of perfection come from? Good question. Where do they come from? The media, magazines, that's right. You look at Clio, Cosmopolitan, Dolly, even New Day, New Women, all of that. The image that they present there is not, remember this one? The image that they present is not that image. It's usually slim, trim. Would you like to pass this back to the two behind you? They didn't get to see that last week.
Thanks, Susan.
Actually, there was an interesting article in last weekend. I don't know whether it was, I think it was in some of the age, but one of those like a Sunday.
Last weekend,
And it was about, I should have brought that tonight. It was on Miss Average Australian. She's a size 14. She's this, and it had like a picture of a woman on the front of it with, she had cellulite, and she, you know, and it was saying that we're not, you know, it was quite good actually. And showing
Yeah. If you still have it, can you bring it in? That would be good. Because yes, the average woman.
Have you got
I've
it?
got it at home.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
quite good.
Yeah.
Very good.
Only influenced by magazines, or is it poor self-worth in women? More.
Yeah, that's part of it.
Poor self-worth than men, maybe.
Yeah, so certainly the body shape is different from a male to a female.
So
Yes.
she's never satisfied because
Mm-hmm.
her self-worth is poor, so
Yes.
she wants to be perfect.
Yes, that's part of it. That's true.
It also comes from your husband, your spouse.
Yep. So it comes from media, so magazines, it comes from your family of origin. If you grew up in a family where mom was always condemning, criticizing, or older sister was held up as the picture of perfection, and you happened to be the opposite of your older sister, and she was supposed to be the absolute perfection, then it comes from family of origin stuff, it comes from peers. Certainly peer group in high school can be very vicious on girls who just don't fit the average, whatever is the model for that year at the high school. So if someone happens to have maybe a bit more darker peach fuzz on their cheeks, they get teased. Or if they just happen to be a bit shorter and squatter and not developing early as everybody else, they get teased. So peer group can be sometimes very vicious in all this sort of area. The culture in general, like we were saying, slim is beautiful. That's what we're taught all the way from the first time you start looking in a magazine and become aware. And so on. Lots of different places present that model of what is perfection. And like I think we talked a few weeks ago that if we took one of our average beautiful people in Australia and put her back in one of the African cultures, she would not be considered beautiful at all because her neck isn't long and stretched and her earlobes aren't long and dangly because of the jewelry that they wear there. So each culture has an idea of what is beautiful as well. Most women would fit ideally in about 200-300 years ago when the famous painters painted women with a little bit more flesh on them, a little bit more fat on them. So some of Rubens' models, you know, nice rounded women that were happy to be rounded women because that's what their culture expected as beautiful back then. So the culture is very important in it.
Has it got anything to do with doctors though?
With
There's
doctors?
also a fairly strong drive from doctors or medical point of view to get down to basically no fat sort of stuff.
Because of heart problems or fear of?
That's both sexes.
Yep, so probably because the fear of heart attacks and all of that, women would drive themselves to match what their doctors are saying for them.
And need to be looking perfect for the men.
And certainly looking perfect for their husbands.
Yes.
Although interesting studies is most women are dressed for other women rather than for their husbands.
That is also
I don't see that pressure for other reasons.
Dressed to impress other women rather than their
to
husbands.
show off.
Okay.
And men don't like the rake thin
That's true.
look anyway.
That is
That's true.
Most guys would much rather.
Have something to put their arms around. That's true.
And
That's
there
very
was
true.
a study done on women where men rated their bodies and women rated their own bodies and that sort of thing. And women always rated themselves like this was the fat end of the scale and this was the thin end. Men would rate them here and the women, oh sorry, which way was it? Anyway, the women
Yeah.
always rated themselves as fatter than the men would.
Yes.
And it got even worse with women with body image disorders like anorexia and then we're always like, oh no, they're thin. And the women are like, no, I'm very fat.
Yes. So women have a far harsher measuring stick for themselves than what husbands do or males do in general. It's true. Number 3, the rejection of womanhood. The rejection of womanhood. Most males are far happier with their own bodies, no matter what their shape, than most women. From childhood onwards, girls collect measuring sticks from magazines, media, Western culture. No matter how healthy and beautiful a woman's body is, she still seems unhappy with it and expects others to be even more critical, especially other women to be more critical. When a woman feels she doesn't match the measuring sticks around her, she takes on self-rejection. And that drives us usually into more diets, more cosmetics, more hair coloring products, or whatever. Certainly that's us without the Lord. So the secular woman is caught in that cycle. So she begins to hate herself and judge herself and begin to drive herself if she feels she doesn't match up. But if you look at males and male culture, do they do the same thing? No. Unless they're really tied into the health club and lifting weights and sports. Usually a man is far more comfortable living in his body than a woman is living in her body. But why is that? Does it mean males are more healthy than we are, than females? No.
Is it because women have a greater need to be loved, and so they try to make the body perfect for the men, whereas the men don't have such a great need to be loved? I could be wrong.
So out of a need for a woman's need to be loved, she tries to have a more perfect body. That is definitely part of it, yes.
I think a man might get more respect from his work than he does from his body.
That's true too. A man gets more respect from his work, more status from his work than his body. That's true. Where a woman constantly is measuring and judging herself, she feels others are constantly measuring and judging herself. So some of her status comes from whether it's how close she is to matching that image. And again, it ties in a lot to the helpmate thing. We'll get to that in a minute. But because of the God-given commission to be a helpmate, to be a helper, part of being a helper is to match the image of the model of who it is you're trying to help. So that's part of it too. So there's several things. Now, when she starts taking on self-rejection, she actually steps into a spirit of rejection. So some areas where this spirit of rejection wants to destroy a woman, she'll feel rejected if her Adam is into pornography and Playboy. So if her husband has this unreal model that he gets from Playboy and pornography, and she's in her 40s and 50s and drifting toward the more rounder figure, and she's not matching those beautiful women in Playboy pictures, how might she feel if it wasn't the Lord? She might feel second rate, second place, that he's building his imagination around the fantastic, beautiful perfection in pornography, but not her, so she can take on rejection there. Her reaction to other women's comments and criticisms of her can replace the reality. So sometimes women are very catty with their remarks and their comments, and so sometimes that will cause her to take on more self-rejection. The message, I'm not good enough, her self-hatred grows bigger. So like what you were saying, Eleanor, that does tie into her self-rejection, her self-worth right to start with. Through rejection, she tries even harder to please others and drives further for perfection, whatever that is for her. Part of her helpmate commission is to find ways to please Adam. If his heart is hooked into pornography or some ideal woman, she will reflect this too. She'll be caught up in the fight it or do it mode. So she's either trying to do it, in other words, produce the desire, the image that's in his heart to try to be that Playboy image, or she could flip into just saying, no, I'm not going to be that, and begin to fight the pornography aspect of it. Or, what's the third choice? So remember, you either fight it, you do it, or you work it through. You resolve it with the Lord. So, if someone decides to work it through with the Lord, number 4, who has the responsibility to be changed? Who has the responsibility to be changed? And there are some women that have gone almost on a crusade to try to get the magazines and the media not to produce all these super skinny, perfective images of models. And again, that doesn't do that much good because the society itself is looking for that sort of perfection, that sort of model. So who has the responsibility? And where do we start change? Do we make others change for us so we can be happy? Doesn't work, does it? So change starts with each one of us, with our own body image. So, who has the responsibility to be changed? Little a, self-care starts with us. Me, myself, and I. So, you have a little picture there with some white space. So what I want you to draw, and you're hopefully better at drawing stick figures than I am. So you can have 2 in there. That's, well, we're talking about women. We'll make it women. Okay. So you got 1 bigger, 1 smaller. Now, inside her heart, it's like all this self-talk is going on. So if a woman's heart, so that's a heart. If you can draw a heart a little bit better than that one in there. Inside her heart is where all this self-talk's going on. So all this ideal image, I don't match up to it, the measuring sticks, the way people feel about me, all the self-talk stuff. Now it's almost like inside there, her heart has a life of its own. And some of us that have done some heart work, we did a unit on heart work. But it's like you can almost, the heart that's in there almost has a personality of its own. It almost has a mind of its own. It certainly has its own self-talk in there. So how do I have to help? How do I reach that heart in there? How do I help my heart to let go of some of that negative stuff? What do I have to do? It's in your talking, yeah? Okay, you have to talk to it almost like, sorry?
Invite Jesus into the picture.
Yes, invite Jesus, but it's almost like inside our heart is a little person. Now, if you had a very precious 5-year-old, and your 5-year-old came and said things like, I'm no good, I'm worthless, I'm helpless, I can't change, I'm not good enough, what would you say to that little 5-year-old daughter? You try to help her feel and understand that, yeah, she is. And that she's good enough for you as parent, or she's good enough for God, however you would approach it. But it's like that self-talk is coming out of the heart. So it's almost like you have to talk to your heart like you talk to that very precious daughter to help her see that, yes, she is good enough. So it's almost like talking to her in such a way that helps her learn how precious she is, how valuable she is. So it's like talking to your heart like it's a very precious, precious little child. Because most of us, our heart has stopped growing somewhere in there with all the trauma points. So self-care basically starts with me doing what? Treating my heart like little child, and that it is valuable and precious and worthwhile. So self-care means to start taking care of myself like I'm valuable and precious and worthwhile and special to God. And that helps start tearing down all the negative self-talk. I'm not good enough. I'm not precious enough. I'll never make it in other people's sight. So self-care begins with each person and their self-talk and learning to take care of themselves and talk to themselves as though they were precious. B, we can't blame others. However tempting it may be to blame the males in our culture for unrealistic measuring sticks, we must take responsibility for our own welfare. Remember, that was some of the path that the feminists went down, is to blame the males in the culture that had control. And so they were very much male, anti-male. But a lot of them still had the negative hatred in their heart toward themselves. So the answer isn't to blame all of them out there, but the answer is to start working in ourselves. See, godly women have the power to change. Do you believe that? Yes, godly women have the power to change. We need to discover an image that Father God has provided for us. Now, is that image always going to match L.L. McPherson or L. McPherson or whoever the latest star is? No. But that image will match someone that is healthy for the body shape, the body size that they have, because that's what God wants us to be. So part of His ideal image is going to be one that's healthy, that's comfortable to live in. I know a lot of women, particularly coming in for counseling, that, like we've already said, just have driven themselves to the point of almost nervous breakdown in trying to get themselves beautiful and perfect and trying to please their partner, and it doesn't work. So part of finding the body image is finding out what God is saying to each one of us of what's healthy for us. If a woman is caught up in the nonsense of striving to create what she cannot be, she will be miserable. And like I said, I see a lot of those in the counseling room, that they're trying to make their body over into something that it just is not designed to be. Much of a woman's crazy eating is displacement activity, a compensation for their need to love and need to be loved. So a lot of eating disorders, that's at the heart of it. It's just they're trying to make up either for a little girl or a little boy, someone in their childhood that didn't get enough love, didn't get enough care and compassion and nurturing. And they're now trying to make that up by giving it to themselves, but in the form of food. Or denying themselves the food that they need. E, learn to treat yourself with true love. You are the only one who can do this for you. So each one of us needs to find God's healthy measuring sticks. And how do we do that? Number 6, submit your body image to Jesus. Remember, that's part of the Christian walk, is learning to accept His Lordship. Number 5, accepting God's design. We went zooming past it really quick. Little a, consciously, deliberately put your body image under the Lordship of Jesus. Discard your biases toward your body in favor of His. So that means get some time and sit with the Lord and say, Lord, what are you saying about my body? Those of us that have done the Boardroom class, that's one of the things we do in the Boardroom, because the Boardroom is part of expression of our personality. And it's interesting to get some feedback on how we think our body is compared to how the Lord thinks our body is. So submit, consciously, deliberately sit with the Lord and let Him talk to you about your body image. Next, complete a healthy inventory with regard to your body. So that means saying, well, Lord Jesus, what are you pleased about the way that I take care of my body? And Lord, what is it you want me to change about it? And I know we're far harder on ourselves than what the Lord is. He knows that it can't be done overnight. Develop problem-solving steps to change what He says needs to be changed. So if He says you need to put on a kilogram, then you go through some problem-solving exercise. Okay, Lord, how can I do that in a healthy way? Not by just eating too much chocolate cake for the next 6 days, but how can I do that in a healthy way? Or if He says to you, you need to take it off, or you need to get more in tone, or you need to get more exercise so that you live in a healthy body, then it's submitting even that to the Lordship of Jesus. Now, most of us, when I start talking about that, say, oh, well, what if He says some terrible things about me that I don't want to hear or I don't want to know? And part of that's stepping into some trust in the whole thing. Because that's one of the greatest lies that Satan has, is that God is not a God of love. So if He loves us, He's going to tell us the best thing that we need to do for our body. He's not a party pooper, as the saying goes. He's not a spoil sport. He's not going to say, leave off chocolate cake unless that's what really needs to be done. So again, it's making your faith real and asking Jesus what He wants to do about your body. So develop some problem-solving steps. If that means changing diet, if that means getting more exercise, if that means getting more sleep, if that means getting more tone up, or whatever it is that you need, let the Lord help you problem solve how to do that. Then learn to live with whatever Jesus says doesn't need to change. If He says, no, your weight's ideal, this is where I want you, then quit going on diets to try to change it. Because that's part of actually living in His Lordship of what do you want to do with my body. And as already has been pointed out, most people who get into diets and cycles like that are so, because they've got a different idea of what their body looks like compared to what other people or what the Lord is saying that they look like. So it's an area to let your Christianity get in practice. Then The last one, set others free to judge you and set yourself free to live the way that God created you to be. To some degree, every woman is afflicted by this dissatisfaction with herself as she is. So it means submitting that again to the Lordship of Jesus and letting Him help us through that. Most women don't look like supermodels and never will. Especially with the years, especially as the years grow on and on and on. It's part of the curse that Adam and Eve brought on the earth, is that as you grow older, what happens to your body? It gets older too. That's right. So part of the aim is to grow old gracefully. So it never will, even with years of plastic surgery or posh spice diets. Most women are also smart enough to know that supermodels must have an element of masochism to remain as desperately thin as many of them do. What's masochism? Yes, the enjoyment of pain. So to stay as thin as some of them do, there must be almost an element of starving themselves, of living on just so little as they do. As Christ followers, we need to find Father God's view of us, not the media's view. Learning to be the best that we can be without tying into the perfection of the world's image makers is essential. So that means being the best that I can be with the body that I've been given. And not everybody has perfect noses and cheeks and eyes and shoulders and everything else. So it's learning to live, bless you, learning to live in the body that God has given you. Yeah?
Gay men are so focused on their bodies too.
Sorry, try once more.
Gay men, why are they so focused on?
Probably because they're tying into a lot of the media image of trying to please other people with their bodies. Sometimes it's part of the gay lifestyle. So they're very clothes fashion conscious and fashion conscious and all of that. So some of it's because they're tied into that lifestyle.
And women who want to look like supermodels.
Yes.
This is what I heard just now from the Lord. Are wearing a mask or something like a disguise to cut themselves off from inner pain, and that is a way of escape, like a method of escaping from reality.
Yes, that's
so they
true.
don't want to face reality, so they try to escape from reality by doing these things.
Yes, so stepping into this body perfect image, this mask, and it's to hide what goes on. That's true. It's very true. In fact, that's a good definition of an addiction. When we're not facing the pain that we have, but we're doing something else to relieve the pain, and we do it often enough and long enough that we get addicted to the behavior to stop the pain, when the answer is to go back and deal with the pain. So I suppose in that sense, dieting can become an addiction, fashion, clothes, makeup, all of that can become an addiction to hide the real them, the real us. True. Good. Any other comments along that line?
What do you do if your husband isn't happy with what God tells you?
Well, probably number one, to go to the Lord and say, well, Lord, what do you want me to do about this? And sometimes a husband isn't happy because the image in his heart is never going to match his wife, no matter how much she would go through plastic surgery and starvation diets and hair coloring, because the image in his heart isn't an achievable one. So sometimes the Lord says, well, then unhook from his image and you do what I want you to do. And that will give you the love to begin to rebalance whatever is the problem in the diet, in the body. So if that's diet or clothing sense, a lot of people dress really poorly because that matches their clothing sense, that matches their self-image. So again, as the self-image is improved with Jesus, then a lot of things start changing about how we see about our own body. So the aim isn't to turn us all into little supermodels. The aim is to be healthy and be comfortable in a healthy body. And that's what the Lord wants.
Also the possibility that a woman's understanding of what a husband might desire is not necessarily what the husband desires.
That's a very good point.
I remember years ago, Lynn had this vision of what I really liked, and when she told me, I thought, it's crazy. That's about the last thing that I would actually want, was to do with the way a lady dressed. And I really did not like the way that lady dressed. But Lynn thought that I loved it, really appreciated it. And it was just a misconception of it.
Yes.
And I think that happens a lot.
Yep. So for the benefit of the tape, yes, that sometimes a wife is hooked into what she thinks is her partner's image and her husband's image, and that is not what's in his heart. So some of it is to try to clarify the image of what the husband really wants. Yeah. So yes, sometimes it's a miscommunication. Sometimes it's the husband really does need to stop and examine the image that's there in his heart. Because sometimes it's a combination of mother...
culture, I don't know if it is here. The men normally they like to see or they even buy ladies that dress frivolously, thick makeup and all that. But when it comes to their own daughters and wives, they don't want them to be like that.
So there's...
How do you reconcile? What is that image?
So there's a difference between what a man will say he wants and he likes to look at compared to what he wants his wife and particularly his daughters to dress like. Yeah, some men that's true. Particularly if it's someone that's not hooked into the Lord and hasn't learned how to control their thoughts and why that is.
It's like double
So they don't
A
have
double
proper
standard, yeah.
image of what a woman should be like.
Well, that's at the heart of a lot of this, is particularly guys without the Lord don't have a proper image in their heart of what a woman was meant to be. They'd like to turn her into the playboy image, and most women are not that to start with. So it's probably a two sides of the coin, both that men need to check out the image that's in their heart and make sure it's a godly image of a woman, and a woman needs to check out and make sure that she is seeing the correct image in her husband's heart, not just assuming that he does want the Cleo Playmate of the Year sort of award looking, because the husband might not want that. And probably that's a good reason why some women that have gone on diets until they're blue in the face, it's still not matching the image that's in their husband's heart, because they've never bothered to stop and check out what's the image in their husband's heart.
I want to ask a question. I get this thought. At creation, when they were created,
Yes.
God created man and woman to have the same perceptions about each other, because they were created, woman was created out of a rib of a man, of the man.
Yep.
But because after the fall, what
So
happened
after the
was
fall,
the perceptions of the women, the male and the female perceptions due to the fall differed. So the woman doesn't see things the way the man sees, because the perceptions are different in general.
Yeah.
But there are differences in perceptions between individuals too.
true.
But in general, women see things very much differently, the way they perceive things.
That's true.
Perception is quite different from reality.
So both of us, both males and females, need to find out where the Lord's reality is in there. It's true. Good. Okay, any other comments about body image? I had a check sheet, rating sheet for you, but somehow it got lost in the printing this round. So. No other comments on body image? Now that's only the tip of the mountain when it talks about body image. It's pretty good size, huge areas. I started doing some research in this whole area. There's a lot of material written about women and their body image, and striving to meet an unrealistic body image and what that does to the core of our personality, to our heart. It tends to really harden and warp and hurt and traumatize the woman when she's constantly trying to live up to something that is not her. So finding out where the Lord is in there is very important. Then, capital D, what about sex? The sex center in your brain is located in the hypothalamus, which is also that part of the brain that controls emotions, heart rate, and blood pressure. Hormones, especially testosterone, are released from this gland, stimulating the desire for sex. So to start out with, it's a physical part of our bodies. Number one, sexual arousal difference between genders. So there's a difference between males and females when it comes to arousal. Little a, if men are gas cookers, women are electric ovens. If men are gas cookers, women are electric ovens. A male can ignite instantly, operate at full capacity in seconds, to be turned off just as quickly. However, a woman's sex drive heats slower and takes longer to cool down. So, instant capacity to a woman that just females that need a little bit longer to warm up in the whole process. So right there you can see a big difference between males and females. Alan Peace, and that's the book that I showed you last week, and his Why Men Don't Listen and Women Can't Read Maps, compiled the following chart on sex drives. For most men, their sex drive peaks around 18, 19 and falls in later life. An average woman shows more interest in sex in later years. So this was supposed to be the little graph that was going to be there on your page, but that also didn't get put into your page tonight. So you get to draw it. So that's what's up here on the board. So you've got a line down one side, up at the top is high sex drive, down the bottom is low sex drive. So a woman's sex drive starts out fairly low during the 18, 19 years, builds up to when about 35, and then slowly tapers off to where about 50 it's back down again like that. So that's a woman's sex drive. Now if you don't get this absolutely perfect on your page, you lose 10 points. So don't worry if you don't get it absolutely perfect. Now, what would you guess about males? Any idea?
Go up and down.
They go up and down a lot faster. Well, 18, 19 starts about here, and yes, goes up fairly sharp, sort of like this. Then somewhere in here they meet. Actually goes lower than a female's during that time period and then comes out like that. Actually supposed to be going down more. So most women don't really become interested in sex until what age? In their 30s, middle 30s on to almost into the 40s. Where most males in the teens, 20s, starts dropping off by 30s. So a male's sex drive reaches its peak somewhere around before he's between 18 and 20. That's at the peak of their sex drive. Now, why would that be so? What can you tell just by looking at that chart? Biological factors, good, that's true. Yeah, so a lot of testosterone is produced during this time period. Why would that be? Well, what's God's purpose in the sex drive is to do what? Besides have pleasure and enjoy it, what else? Procreate. So it's during this time period when the sex drive is the strongest that most families get started. Now, once the family is started and into primary school and high school, then that's when a woman's sex drive begins to kick in a bit more. And as you notice, even more in the 35 to 45 age bracket, her sex drive is actually higher than his. So she wants a little bit more sex than what he does at that age time, but not during the early years. And do you suppose that's one reason why in some cultures, well, our culture too, why older women get hooked into younger men? Because a woman in her 30s and 40s finding a 16, 18, 19, 20-year-old, their sex drive is a bit more matched. So yes, sometimes that happens. Any other comments about that?
Why wouldn't they have just been the same all the way along?
Good question. Why not? Anybody else like to answer that before I jump into it?
Well, my guess would be that there's a bit of protection in there
Yes?
from every female in the world finding herself pregnant at 18 or 19 or 20.
Yes.
Would that be...
Yes, that's part of it. Yes.
Because if
So-
up there, there'd be a real problem.
Why
Yep.
can't they both pick at 30?
Well, partly because hopefully the family's pretty well on the way by then. And again, hormonal changes. Yeah. Society pressures, there's a little bit less. And probably self-image stuff too for a woman. She starts finding herself a bit more in her 30s, 40s, and 50s. Where a lot of young ones are still, matching the, their interests and their attention is elsewhere.
But this was not formally, this is now, no, this is happening in the present day, but ages ago.
Ages
So
ago.
after Eve's time,
Yeah.
it would have been different.
That would be interesting to sort out. We can't go back and do a survey. Certainly in the Victorian era, women's sex drive was expected to be what? During 0. So she would have been expected to be way down here. Not show any interest in sex at all, not have any inclination or pleasure. That's what the Victorian era taught women. That sex was something that you did with the candles blown out in the middle of the night and you only endured, you just put up with it. And that was the attitude that most women picked up then.
There were more prostitutes then than there ever then.
Sorry?
There were more prostitutes then in the Victorian era than ever.
So there are more prostitutes in the Victorian era, could very well be.
Due to the culture of the country. no?
Because of the culture of the country. That's true.
But the Eastern countries would have been different, no? Eastern.
Well, what's interesting in Peace's book, they did a bit of a survey that, now if I can remember it, Latin Americans have the highest testosterone, males. Caucasians and Africans have pretty much the same amount, female, in the female gender, have pretty much the same amount. Where they were saying that the Asian males had the lowest testosterone count when they did the study. Now what that means I'm not quite sure, because the Asian population rate is exploding where in some countries ours isn't. The Western culture isn't. But it was interesting, they did compare the different cultures and the testosterone. What about conflict between husband and wife during this time? Can be a nightmare. That's true. Because the husband actually has a need for sexual release, to release the tension of it. So her sex drive is not as strong as his during that time. So there's going to have to be some negotiation and compromise in the whole thing. But yes, this is one of the biggest complaints in the counseling room is because of that, the difference between the male and female sex drive during that time period.
Is that so you learn to communicate early on?
That's one of the results of it, yes. I don't know if that's why God designed it that way or not, but yes, you do. You've got to learn how to. And women have got to learn how to set themselves free to know what pleases them, what feels good, and to ask for it, to be able to say, yes, that's good, I like that. Where most women are very hesitant to do that, to really let their partner know what pleases them, what feels good and what doesn't feel good. And that's sort of a hidden underlying thing with women too. But yes, negotiation, talking, compromise, working it out. Interesting. Any other comments on the chart?
With the female, the line, the self-acceptance thing,
Yes?
whereas in the early stage, the female time gains self-acceptance, and later on, at say 30 or so, is more likely to accept herself and then be free to enjoy
Yes.
that.
Yes. Yeah, I think so too. Less inhibited, less shy, less just knowing herself a lot more, knowing her body a lot more, being a lot more comfortable with her body. Yeah, certainly most women feel a whole lot more like they've found themselves in their 30s, 40s, and 50s than in the teenage years, in the early 20s. There's a lot of who am I and what am I about in the 20s. So being more comfortable, more relaxed with their physical body.
And part of it, from the last point of view, it probably has as much to do with peer group pressure as a lot of other things.
Yes. Oh yeah, that time period would be the footy games and the yeah. Yep, good point. Okay, overall, most males have a higher sex drive than women. And this was an interesting statistic according to the book, and you guys will have to verify this or not. That 37% of men think about sex every 30 seconds. Isn't that amazing? 37% of males in the study that he conducted think about sex every 30 seconds. Isn't that amazing?
It cuts across all age groups.
Well, particularly during this time period, I'd say yes, definitely during that time period. I don't think older males would fit in that category so much. What would you suspect? What would you suspect it would be for women? He didn't record those statistics for women, but what would you suspect?
I think they just must vary a lot between people.
Yes.
Some women
Yeah.
think about it a lot more than women.
Yes. Some women would think about it a lot more. Some women wouldn't think about it maybe once every 2 or 3 weeks. Well, especially if they're single, but if they're in a married relationship, they probably think about it more. And, yeah. But that just shows the difference. Sorry, we missed that?
I just said they get reminded.
They get reminded. That's true. Yeah, some women that I see, they get reminded and they think, well, no, can't that night because that's my period. Can't that night because I'm over at Mom's. Can't that night because I'm over whatever. But yes, that's true. They get reminded. But it probably would be a fair lower statistic for females. But you're right. Again, to go back to the bell-shaped curve that we were talking about, you can't say all men are this way or all women are this way. So some women would have a higher sexual appetite, a higher sex drive, and would think about sex a whole lot more than some other women would. And it depends on, on circumstances. If they're trying to get pregnant, they probably think a whole lot more about sex than someone who was trying not to get pregnant or not interested at all. You want to share that one or not?
No, just one of my friends at work.
One of your friends at work. Okay, 2. Sex, however, is good for your health. Sex is good for your health. Sex has been proven to improve your health. An amorous interlude 3 times a week uses up 35,000 kilojoules, which is equal to running 130 kilometers a year. So that's about 10 kilometers a month. Three amorous adventures with your husband would be equal to that. So if you want to lose weight, it's another way to lose weight. In one study, researchers found the frequency of having sex in Australian couples, now here this is Australian, it's not the US, varies according to age. So in the 20s, the study showed that there was a frequency of 144 times a year. So to do that really quickly, 12 months will give you how many times a month? So 12 into 144 goes 12 times. So about twice a week. In the 30s, 112 times a year, 40s, 78 times a year, 50s, 63 times a year, and 60s, 61 times a year. Now, of course, that's on a bell-shaped curve, so you'll have some people that would only have sex maybe once a month in their 20s and 30s, some that would have every night, So you've got a variation in there in the bell-shaped curve. But you can see the frequency goes down as the age goes up. But that's the average. So 144 times a year is just about 2 or 3 times a week. They also found that 81% of couples claimed to be happy in their sex life. Now, that's what they found in the survey. I'd question that as how realistic they were, how honest they were. However, the book points out there must be plenty of negotiation must be taking place to find this satisfactory level. So if you're looking at couples in this time period to say that 81% are happy with their sex life, there must be some negotiation, some talking it out going on. An increase of testosterone levels fortifies the bones, muscles, keeps the cholesterol levels and helps the cholesterol levels and produces endomorphins. You say it your way, I'll say it my way. The body's natural painkillers, such things as headaches, whiplash, arthritis, were proven to improve with a good sex life. Hormones. Yes? Whiplash must be very delicately. There goes that excuse. Okay. Hormones produced just prior to orgasm improve cognition, builds the immune system, inhibits tumor growth, builds bone strength. Estrogen in women is credited with helping build better bones and a healthy cardiovascular system. So the hormones that get released during sex are proven to improve and help your health. Now that's certainly in a satisfactory sex relationship, not one where it's a lesser abusive relationship.
So estrogen protects the heart.
Interesting statistics and all of that and comments on all that. Again, that's all coming out of Peace's book in that area. So there are some good things to having sexual relations. And sometimes with women, it boils down to that, as starting to think, okay, what's some good reasons to have sexual relations with your husband, and begin to build in the positive reasons for the whole thing. Number 3, sex and emotional needs of women. Sex and emotional needs of women. Like most other areas of a woman's life, her sexual needs are greatly colored by her emotions and her inner thought life. For her, past hurts, expectations, disappointment, heart lies, self-talk all contribute to set the stage for the activity or lack of sex. She has great difficulty separating the event from her emotions, the act from her heart needs. Stress, tension, emotions, monthly cycles, her children's needs, her overall health will all influence her interest in sex. A woman often uses sex to fill up her emotional love tank. How true is the statement, a woman uses sex to get love, while a man uses love to get sex? A woman needs to understand that providing sex for a man, is just as much an act of love as the man providing for the emotional well-being of his partner. So again, it's a combination of the two together. It's the husband learning how to take care of the emotional needs of his wife, and I guarantee if a man learns to do that, he'll have more sex than he can handle, because that will make her begin to bloom in his hands. So he needs to learn how to provide the emotional covering, the emotional support for his wife, and she needs to learn that providing sex for the man is just as an important act of love as what she's asking for. So again, it's a combination of things working together. Any comment on that?
Where does duty fit in?
Where does duty fit in? Sometimes duty is, well, Lord, what do you want me to do? And I do this as unto you, because you've asked me to do it.
What if that isn't acceptable to the husband?
Because he wants to be chased around the bedroom, or he wants more passion in it?
Yeah.
It depends on who you're talking to. If we're talking to the husband, then he needs to learn how to protect her emotionally and meet more of her emotional needs, and she can do that for him. If it's the wife and the husband chooses to go his own path, again it's, well, Lord, what do you want me to do about this? Sometimes it's the negotiation path, to really talk it out and bring it out in the open and talk it through. But if he won't, and again if he chooses not to, that leaves her in a very painful place. So it's, Lord, what do you want me to do here? And like we talked about a few nights ago, it's working on respect, because once her respect starts to go, so does the love. So sometimes working on the respect will bring back some of the love interest. But other things she can do is look at her own inhibitions. Probably most women, when they come to the marriage bed in the early years, are very, very inhibited, very much shy when it comes to even undressing in front of a man, in front of their husband. So looking at our own inhibitions is important, and whether they're realistic inhibitions or whether it's just something we've learned or picked up somewhere. Sometimes finding some good Christian books on sex helps, and there are some good ones around that are written in it, in that whole area. Sometimes getting a basic sex education helps, so a woman knows what she can expect from her body and what she can expect from her partner's body. But again, like it's already been pointed out, it's an area for communication, for talking. And if the husband won't do it, or the wife won't do it, because sometimes it's the other way around. Sometimes the wife is the one that doesn't want to talk about it. Then sometimes it's just a problem area that goes on and on and on until someone gets desperate enough and gets some help or leaves or whatever. But that's why, like we were saying, that's one of the biggest areas of conflict that comes into the counseling room. Is the difference in sex needs. And to get women to talk about it sometimes is a problem. Because there's sort of an unwritten code that women don't talk very much about sex. They go through it, go through the periods, go through the cycles and all, but they don't talk much about sex. So in some ways we women need to talk more about sex so we understand what God's saying in the whole thing. But good question, and yeah, it's hard.
Quite often childhood stuff comes into it too.
For a woman, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. And that's partly why Peace was saying that men are like gas cookers. So it's easy in a male's mind to be able to separate sex from emotions, from feelings toward the person, where for a woman it's very hard to do that. That her sexual nature and her emotional nature are very close together. And certainly if abuse has happened in the past, unless she has an understanding partner, that makes it very hard.
And it's hard too if she doesn't remember the abuse or something, and it's just this problem and you just don't know where it comes from.
Yeah. It's true. Any other comments? Is this helpful to... It's a bit better balance. It really brings into perspective how different males and females think about sex. It's amazing the difference between the two, particularly during that time period in early married life. For women just to understand what's realistic, what's healthy, what's natural, what's normal. I had a young girl tell me in her first year of marriage, she was quite horrified that people had intercourse once a week. She thought that was abnormal. So that's what her husband wanted 3 times a week, and she thought that was very abnormal. So for her to understand some of this stuff, it helped her see that no, that's normal. Therefore, she needed to do something about her attitude toward the whole thing. But there is a huge difference in male-female thinking when it comes to sex, and for lots of different reasons, and we'll talk about that after we come back from our break. So let's take a cuppa break. We're on page 5, capital E. What do males want from sex? What do males want from sex? Number 1, sex for a man is fairly primitive. And that's Daniel's word, not mine. Sex for men is fairly primitive. For men, sex is far simpler, primarily a release from the built-up tension of sex hormones. For him, sexual release is similar to the relief, and this is definitely Daniel. One of the greatest compliments, I'll tell you this, share this with you, one of the greatest compliments Daniel ever gave me. He was saying, Susan, you know, sometimes being close to you is like having the relief when you just have to go to the toilet so bad and you just can't stand it, and the pleasure that comes from relief and going to the toilet. That's how comfortable it is being with you sometimes. And I thought about it and thought about it and thought about it. What a line. What a line. But for him that was a real compliment. Because I'd never thought about it. I've been very aware of it after that. But when you just got to go and you just sit there, or for males, stand there, just the relief that comes is just evidently just, you know, that's like wearing a very, very comfortable pair of shoes. And so he was paying me a compliment. So, for him, sexual release is similar to the relief felt when quenching thirst or hunger or relieving oneself at the toilet. So having a good, long, comfortable, what was some other words? And I thought, okay. That was a compliment. He's also likely to release the intensity of his emotions through sex. Conflict, dispute, and triumph can bring the need for sex. Men also use sex to express physically what they have trouble expressing emotionally. So sometimes for a husband to have a passionate sex encounter with his wife is the way he's saying, I love you, and you're important to me, and you're precious to me. Difficulty hearing, thinking, driving, or operating heavy machinery. Probably, yes, his comment, probably because he's thinking about having sex. I was trying to read that the right way. Not that it was a gentle hint to Susan. No, Daniel doesn't do that. He's more out in the open. So, doesn't drive heavy machinery. Doesn't drive heavy machinery, that's true. So it's probably because he's thinking about sex. So he has difficulty hearing, thinking, and driving or operating heavy machinery. So for a man, for males, sex is very important. It's a release of all the emotional built-up energy that's inside, a release of the hormones built up. And of course, it's Creator God's way of ensuring that the species keeps going, a man's sex drive. 2, women need more foreplay than men. Women need more foreplay than men. A woman has the opposite need of arousal, to feel the buildup of tension over a longer period of time. So she's a lot slower to get started and all that. Most women need about 30 minutes of direct foreplay before they're ready for sex. But the whole day's events can be a turn off or a turn on for women. Put this way, he wants to empty, she wants to fill up. Understanding women's emotional needs and sexual arousal can help men to become more caring lovers. So once males understand the difference in the emotional, sexual, gender difference of sex, they can become more caring lovers. Any comments about that? What do I mean by the whole day's events can be a turn on or a turn off for women?
Yes, well, if he doesn't pay attention to her when he comes home from work, or doesn't ring her from work during the day, she's not started on the track. Yeah,
And if certainly,
she's not being prepared in any way. Often.
So lovemaking for a woman starts from the moment she wakes up in the morning until the actual event. And depending on how he treats her, talks to her, touches her, relates to her, it can be a build-up for the sexual interlude that they have that night, or the opposite, it can be such a turn-off that she's not interested in sex at all, and then he wonders why and what's wrong with her, sort of stuff. So males need to learn how to be a bit more romantic during the day to help get their wife ready for the big event at night. Any comments on that from married ladies? Is that true?
That's very true.
It's very true.
It takes
Yeah.
about
to lunch to a favourite little restaurant.
Sometimes taking her out to lunch to her favorite little restaurant. Yes, yes. So again, it's a woman's emotional needs tied into her sex needs that make it happen for a woman. And males need to learn how to be that little bit more romantic, that little bit more thoughtful of where she's at. And like I said, once a husband learns how to protect and nurture his wife's emotional needs, he'll have more sex than he can handle, because she'll be right there ready to be there for him like he is there for her.
If I could just follow up on that, that's very true what you say, because I heard another lady say that, and she had sort of surveyed a lot of ladies.
From some surveys,
Yeah, she did her own survey before she spoke to a large group of men, and she said that same sort of comment, that he can have more sex than what he could handle if he connected with her emotionally, physically, and spiritually.
Yes, yes. Emotionally, physically, and spiritually, to connect together. Yes, and that's true. That's true.
Yes. I'd say one further thing, that men need to know that their wife is a romantic. She's not a male in a female body.
That the wife is romantic, she's not a male in a female body. Very true.
Some men are stupid enough to think, well, I'm glad my wife's not one of those mushy ones.
And so they treat her that way, and she's feeling robbed, and yes. Good point. That's true. Very true. 3, a man's self-identity is linked to his sex prowess. A man's self-identity is linked to his sex prowess. In fact, that's probably one of the ways that women destroy a male ego, is to insinuate that he's not very good as a lover. Just like women's image of themselves is linked to their body image, so the self-image of many men is linked to their perception of being a good sex performer. A man's measure of his prowess as a lover is often related to her level of satisfaction. So I find a lot of husbands say, but I ask my wife how happy they are with our sexual relations, and what does she want us to do different? And a lot of times the wife can't talk about it, can't tell him, but his need for finding out what pleases her and what doesn't please her is directly related to how he sees himself as a competent lover. So if she's not giving him the kind of feedback that helps him know how to please her better, and he's so turned off and doesn't want to know how he can please her better, then the cycle just goes round and round and deteriorates more and more. Many men find it difficult to perform adequately during sex. They either premature ejaculate or lose sexual arousal. It's important for both males and females to negotiate the details of sexual activity so that both are sexually satisfied. This requires openness and honesty by both people. And again, that's something that women need to give themselves permission to do more than what they do. Because most wives, particularly those that come and see counselors, haven't really told their husbands what it is that they enjoy and what they like and what they don't want and what they don't prefer. And so they often, the complaint is that she just lays there like a good little slave, like a good sack of potatoes, and that's it. And so he's bored with the whole thing, which means she's bored with the whole thing as well. So that when conversation can happen and communication and talking about it, when the wife gives herself permission to do that, and to say it in terms that the husband understands. And sometimes that means not the flowery, tactful way that women use with women, but to be honest with a male. And males can take a lot more honesty than what we think they can, which what we as women think they can. In fact, Daniel often says to me when I'm counseling a male to make sure I say it just like it is, straight down the line. You can be a lot tougher with males than you can with females, to be a lot more tactful with women, and we've learned how to do that with each other in a woman's culture. So women giving themselves permission to say it like it is for their husbands in a sexual relationship is very important. 4, why are men into pornography? And that's a question that I hear often in the counseling room. So why are they into pornography? Psychologists have discovered that around 80% of our sensory input is through vision, either touch, hearing, taste, or whatever. So it comes through our tactical, through our senses. Therefore, men's quick way of arousal is through sight and fantasy, so internal imagination, internal sight. Vision is instantaneous, like his sex drive. Seeing a scantily clad female does get his his gas cooker going. Now, Satan has used the fact of visual stimulation to control men's sexuality by displaying underdressed women in the media. In fact, it's everywhere. They sell toothpaste with scantily dressed women, and chainsaws, and Range Rovers, and planes, and holidays, and everything. So sex is a big come-on. And the media, the advertisers have learned to use that. Pornographic images in magazines, movies, videos, and now the internet have all taken men's minds captives. Some of the men's premature ejaculation problem stems from being overstimulated. So if the husband has a problem with premature ejaculation so that the wife isn't being satisfied, sometimes it's because his mind is filled with a lot of pornography and that kind of images, which means he's just overstimulated and can't control the basic pleasure of the sexual intercourse. In our hypersexual era, most males need to learn to be more sensual rather than just visual. Now, particularly as their wife is getting older, wrinkles are happening, sags are happening. A husband needs to learn to hook more into her smell, her touch, the sound of her voice, rather than the actual Elle Macpherson model figure that he once may have had. But he needs to become more sensual, not so much sexual. And that's just to enjoy the touch of skin on skin is more sensual. And probably a woman needs to learn how to be more sensual and appreciate her husband's body as well. But again, that ties into so much inhibitions that we as women have. But when you think that sex was Father God's creation, was Creator God's creation, so He meant for married couples to enjoy the physical relationship that they could have in a sexual relationship. So God designed it as a gift, something to be very precious, something to be a way of communicating between two people of the love and the physical desire as well as the emotional support and connection there. So our hypersexual society. Husbands need to explore the God-given sensuousness of a female body with their other four senses. Being less visual and more sensual would cause men to not be so quick and rough in their lovemaking, and certainly their wives would appreciate it more. Any comments on any of that? That's okay. Well, I think lust is the perverted way that Satan has got into the sex drive.
Because most people think that if you haven't, you don't lust after each other when you haven't got the desire or whatever.
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily true.
Well, it's interesting if you come down to what a definition of lust is. What is lust? When we talk about lust,
Something you can't be happy without.
Something that you can't be happy
When you don't have it.
when you don't have it. Yes. So can you have lust for more than sex?
Yeah.
Yes. You can have a lust for clothes. You can have a lust for food. You can have a lust for roses. You can have a lust for cars. Anything that you want more and more and more of is a lust thing. So if you've got a lust for sex, it's like more and more appetite for more and more sex. And so the mind is going round and round and round and wanting more. I think it was Bill Gates that somebody asked, how much is enough? And he said, just a little bit more is enough. So if you want just a little bit more of something, it can be a lust sort of thing. So we usually think of lust when it comes to sex, but lust can be in lots of other areas as well. So it's wanting just a little bit more. So in this sense, it's wanting a little bit more pleasure, wanting a little bit more the excitement, the thrill that comes with ejaculation, that comes with a climax. So if a man or a woman is lusting for more pleasure that comes from intercourse, then that could be a lust problem. And then lusting after what turns them on to get them started in that, like the pornography, then becomes its own problem as well. So in God's definition, no, lust, it wouldn't come into it. Probably more just you can have a healthy sexual appetite but not have lust. And it becomes a mutual sharing sort of thing. So it's not one person saying, no, I want my pleasure and I want it now. It can be a mutual sharing thing.
And God would tell you what that is, I suppose.
And God would tell you what that is, yeah. Now we haven't talked anything about where boundary lines are. That's another topic that comes into it, particularly when couples come in and they talk about that area with a counselor, of what she thinks is normal and what he thinks is normal. So he might be really into some oral sex, and she says, no, that is not God's way of doing it. So somehow to help couples talk through where their boundary lines are, so that they can be comfortable with what it is that their their sex life is involved with, without one person just constantly giving in to the other and then feeling guilty and dirty afterwards. So that's an important part of it that we didn't get a chance to talk about in the unit. Any other comments about that area?
I go away playing golf with about 25 bus drivers.
You're playing golf with about 25 bus drivers?
Affiliation with these guys.
Yes.
And I haven't yet met another Christian amongst them. Now, growing up in a Christian church, like church
Yeah.
like this,
Yeah.
most of your friends are Christian,
Are Christians, yes.
discussing things like lust and how you handle all that deal,
Yep.
all that sort of stuff through the years.
Yes.
You sort of develop this thing, well, that's the Christian
The Christian perspective on lust,
really
yes.
sure what's the non-Christian approach, but you
Yeah.
always believe that it's
Yes.
whatever.
Yeah.
And I sat back one day, we were going on down to Cow somewhere in the bus, or sitting up the back of the bus, or just driving and talking. And a guy brought out a pornographic magazine. And I reckon out of the 20 guys on that bus, only 3 of them were in the least little bit interested in it. And they weren't Christian. Now, if you brought it out in the foyer at Crossway, I imagine not too many would show any interest in it. But I was very surprised at the attitude of the guys on that bus. And they weren't all, it was more the early 20-year-olds.
Yeah.
But the guys that had got past that age didn't appear to really be interested in the lust
Angle of it, yeah.
I mean, I watched it go around, and a guy would look at it and say, and pass it on, and not even really contemplate it. No, go.
Just quick glance and looked, yeah.
Which changed my understanding on what a non-Christian's attitude is.
That's interesting, yeah. Especially in our society where it's such a emphasis on sex, such an emphasis on pornography and whatever.
But they were sort of fairly random. I suppose they, most part they were bus drivers, but I think that was probably the only thing they really had in common. They're very different sort of guys.
I think probably because pornographic material has been around since the 70s.
Yes.
I think a lot of men have had their fill of that, right? And sort of it's just another magazine. It's not
anything
not
special.
relevant
It's yeah,
anymore, you know.
yeah.
It's
That
not
could
something
be.
that's just arrived on the scene.
Yeah, that could very well be.
For 30 years.
Yeah. Compared to our grandfathers, where it was fairly rare, that was sort of the National Geographic and the pictures of the naked natives were what was about their only pornographic stuff back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Yeah. It's a good point. So it could be that there's enough of it around that it's no big deal. Yeah, it's possible.
But the perceptions that most young people are brought up with are different to what the reality is.
The perception is different than the reality. Yeah, do you want to explain that a little bit more?
Well, somehow you get the idea that sex should be like this and you should do it this many times and otherwise it's not normal.
Yes.
whereas it often isn't what is the reality.
Yes. And especially if a girl grows up thinking it's a whole lot more romantic than it might be.
That's right.
Where in reality, it's not. It's very unpredictable. So, yes?
Particularly when it's what's written in books and all these stories.
Oh, books, yes, with skyrockets and firecrackers, and you think that instant orgasm for both of them multiple times over and over and over and over and over, where in reality that's not true. In fact, one of the biggest struggles of young married women is just how to handle sex, and to get used to it and what it means, and so it's probably a much bigger problem than we think it is. Certainly in the counseling room I hear a lot about that. A fair few couples that don't even consummate their marriage until 3 or 4 months into the marriage, because it is just such a problem for the wife.
Do you think that it's more of a problem for Christian women because there is this sort of quashing on a little bit, that it's more acceptable for women to be speaking about sexuality in the secular industry and stuff like that, whereas there's almost this sort of thing, and I get a little bit frustrated when we talk about, like I've been a leader in Lighthouse, and every sex talk was about how women don't want it and men do, and I just sat there thinking, but there are a lot of women that do, and I think that sometimes we build this image that women are sort of giving into men's desires to have sex and they're just sexless. And I think that almost, we've got this image in Christian, like I agree that what we're talking about today, but just that women aren't, it's not as acceptable for them to have those desires in Christian circles.
Yes, certainly, well, for women in general, but in Christian circles, yes, definitely. And then you add on top of that any traumatic sexual abuse that they've had or experiences in the past, so it's understandable why women are very hard. But yes, once a woman's sex drive is recognized, and once she's nurtured in her sexuality and gets through some of her inhibitions, that's probably why this happens. The female sex drive is stronger than the male's during that age period, because she's much more comfortable with her body. She's let go of a lot of inhibition. She knows a lot more what she likes and doesn't like and what she wants. But yes, I reckon it's a topic that needs to be talked about far more in Christian circles with young Christian girls and whatever it is. In a healthy way.
Stem into unhealthy, perverted talk. So it can just be spoken of. Not like
It's
with
not
a
going the other way.
but in a healthy way that makes it go, okay, I'm allowed to be curious and I'm allowed to be sexual.
Yes.
Like I reckon we'd have a lot less sex problems and all
Agreed.
that kind of stuff.
Agreed.
If it was spoken about.
Yeah.
And if it was comfortable to be able to say to someone, I'm struggling with this.
It's true. Agreed. I'd like to see it a lot more talked about in Christian circles, but it's probably better in this day and age than it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago, where you were expected to have absolutely no interest in sex at all until your wedding night, and then you were expected to turn into this nymphomaniac overnight. After 5-10 years of suppressing your sex drive, all it was to flip the switch, and it just didn't happen. But yes, I reckon it needs to be talked about far more than what it does. So if I've got anybody, I'll send them to you too, okay? But yes, in a healthy way. More real. Yeah, it's true. Agreed.
And they need to know that it's okay to say no and,
So it's okay to say no, yes? Yeah. And to work to compromise. And again, a lot of times a woman says no because of either the environment or the circumstances, or because she's not romantically warmed up enough. He hasn't treated her with the love and respect that she needs, and so she's ready.
Yeah, sometimes getting across to them that you're not rejecting them, it's just that it's not who you are at, it's difficult.
Yes, because a male's sex drive is tied up a lot more with his ego, a lot more with his self-image, where for female it's more her body's tied up with her ego and her image and all of that. So to how to say, no, sorry, not tonight, without causing him to feel rejected, yes, that's a crucial tactful skill that women need to learn. Yeah.
Do you find it will become an easier thing to deal with as, like, younger and younger we're teaching our children about this stuff?
Yeah.
Do you think it'll become easier for the next generation? Like,
yes and no. With the more open sex education comes a lot more experimenting younger and younger, which means that there's a lot of hurt and abuse going on younger and younger in the whole thing. So there is more trauma when they come to their wedding night. So that's part of it, as well as it's still sort of a double standard for women. I mean, it's still there. They tried to get rid of it in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, in the year 2000, but there's still a double standard for women, and I think that's some of her God-given commission, that, you know, if the woman is the child bearer, she does need to still keep her purity, her, you know, the secular, what we talked about, the feminist view of women can have sex just as much as a male and doesn't affect them any differently, is a lie. Because a woman's emotional need gets so much tied up into it, far more than a male's emotional need. But whether it will get easier and easier, well, I don't know. There's always two sides to the coin. But it does help, you know, it does underline the essential principle that we need to be open and honest with our children and help them have a sexual...
Because they're not going to get to the stage where it's they've just got married, it's their wedding night, and they just don't know what to do. You know?
Yeah.
Your mother never told you, well, you haven't got a clue, have you?
Yeah. Well, peer groups are pretty good at educating, or some schools have sex education programs and all of that. But yes, there needs to be talk about it. Yeah. Because I find the other problem too, a lot of people that particularly come into counseling, it's like inside they're about 4, 5, 6, and yet they've entered into marriage and they're in this sexual relationship, and some of them are even pre-puberty. They haven't even had a healthy interest in physically, you know, starting puberty inside. Emotionally, they haven't even started puberty. Their body has, but emotionally, they're this 4, 5, 6-year-old trying to carry on an adult sexual relationship, and it's hard. So dealing with some of the past issues like the sexual abuse or whatever is very important. We're pretty complicated creatures, aren't we? Yeah. Okay, conclusion. Women need to remember that the majority of males have different timing, different goals, and expectations than do females. Like someone's already pointed out tonight, that males are not females in a male body, or neither are females males in a female body. We're very different. So this explains their different thinking processes and behavior patterns. Few areas show up as dramatically different to females as the male's attitude about sex. As a general rule, women want physical, emotional touch rather than just the intensity of intercourse. A wife must take her authority to negotiate sexual details with her husband, who might just want a quick physical release. Both people in the marriage need to have unconditional positive regard for the other so that mutual growth in the sexual area can happen. And that is Father God's aim too. There are many books written to help us understand male-female differences, including sex. Again, the major point to remember is that Creator God gave married couples the gift of sex. It was His idea to start with. Turning our differences into partnership is possible. So there are going to be a lot of people line up at Father God's throne and say, okay, God, why did you design sex to start with? Because since the fall, that's been one of the greatest hurts, one of the greatest traumas, is the whole area of sex between males and females. Any other comments on any of that?
One of the things I don't think I was ever able to accept within my peer group was the male's attitude to women, the idea of wanting them to have sex. And the moment they did, they banished them to the promiscuous not to be wives situation. And even growing up as whether I was 18 or 20-year-old or whatever, I could never understand it. I was always, my heart said that was absolutely dead wrong. Even though everywhere you went, you heard it. And so the moment a woman did have sex, she was a prostitute, more or less.
Yeah.
But if you didn't, then she was just difficult to get on with, or cold, or frigid, or any other number of things that they could dream up that would degrade that woman until they finally got what they wanted.
And then they didn't want her anymore. They lost respect.
And that to me seems to be one of the real problems. If there was an answer to that, that you could get into the minds of young guys, if they could see through that.
Yes. Well, that's part of the double standard for women, that there's only sort of the mental idea that there's only two kinds of women. There's either the virgin or there's the prostitute, that there's nothing in between, where that's not true. You know, particularly since if it wasn't her idea in the first place to have sex, it was the guy's idea, but yet he's the one that dumped her because she just gave in. So it goes back to the double standard for women and men. Yeah, a lot of painful trauma goes into sexual relations, particularly in the early years. Yeah. But then it's been one of the devil's playgrounds is the whole sexuality thing. But it's possible to bring sexuality back under the lordship of Jesus and to restore it back to what God wanted it to be in the first place. And that doesn't mean that you have to turn into two Puritans in the bedroom, because there's lots of fun things that couples can do in a sexual relationship without getting into perverse things. You know, it's meant to be a communication between two people. So like most things, we probably only just scratched the surface of what God wanted and planned for sex to be between a couple.
Does the Bible draw a line with that kind of where it steps over into the sort of do that whole, is it still glorifying God, is it still pure, is it still holy?
Yeah, well, like a lot of it's like there are no real verses that come out and say this is right and this is wrong. Just like there's no verses that come out and talk about masturbation as right or wrong. So some of it has been a cultural thing that we've adopted into the culture that we've said is now Christian right and wrong. Other cultures have much more variety in lovemaking positions, in sexual techniques than in the Western. And you know, areas like that, bestiality and all that sort of stuff. Most couples would say now that's, you know, far beyond what is God permitting in the relationship. But you know, how much nudity is there in the marriage relationship? How much taking showers? You know, some people think taking showers together is perverse and wouldn't do that. So some of it's tied in with our inhibitions, some of it's tied in with our culture, some of it's tied in with what we think God would think about it. So some of it's negotiated between couples, and certainly health standards come into it. The lining in the mouth is not adapted, and there's not a protection in the lining of the mouth to handle some of the, how can I say this, some oral sex. You know, the mouth is not designed by God to handle oral sex because there just isn't the protection in the mouth for that. And the same with anal sex. The anus doesn't have the protection designed in the actual structure to stop some of the sexually transmitted diseases, where the vagina is. You know, the vagina, it's interesting design. The vagina is a self-cleansing organ. It's interesting because the vagina in a woman actually cleanses itself and keeps itself clean. So it's a natural bacteria. Just the way God has created the vagina is a natural killer of foreign bacteria, where the mouth isn't, and certainly the anus isn't. So some things you have to just know that it's, you know, health-wise is not in God's design.
Why would you need protection if we were in God's design anyway and only having sex with God?
Exactly. We wouldn't. Now that's if the couple's into anal sex. That's what I'm saying, that the anus itself is not designed to keep out bacteria and all the foreign, like the vagina is. So there's probably a whole lot more room for negotiation within a safe area of intercourse than what most couples think there is. But again, it needs to be talked about, it needs to be brought out in the open, and not just the wife's enduring in silence and then feeling resentful and dirty and guilty the next morning because she's just given in to whatever her husband has wanted to do. So there needs to be some talking it through, some boundary lines in it. Does that help?
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other comments or?
It's very important, isn't it, to find the difference between sex and intimacy.
Yes.
And that's the communication, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes.
The communication is what develops the intimacy.
The communication is what develops intimacy. That's right.
The desire for sex, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the way it works.
Yeah. Yeah.
Quite often the guy thinks he has sex that creates the intimacy, but
yeah. Well, again, that's difference in male-female thinking. What really creates intimacy is the sharing of emotions. So one of the, some of the classic studies of kidnap victims, where the victim and the kidnapper share emotions and they, get really involved with each other, that builds an incredible bonding. Even so much, probably the most famous one was Patty Hearst back in the 60s. She was an heiress for the Hearst Media Publishing Company, so mega dollars, millionaire's daughter, and she was kidnapped by a group of radicals, and they so bonded together that she actually joined them and started robbing banks with them. So sharing emotions creates the bonding, and that's what a woman wants, is the intimacy that comes with being able to share her heart and her feelings and her emotions, and therefore she shares her body. That's true. That's very true.
Susan, I think that there's so much more Christian literature on the subjects that we're talking about tonight.
Yes.
Now,
definitely.
Than what there was, previously. Going back years. And
It's
so,
true.
So I think we need probably to be aware of that literature is
Yes.
available.
Yes.
And to read it because it is really, really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, I strongly recommend to all the young couples before they get married to hook into some of the books. Like Tim LaHaye has a really good one of The Act of Marriage. And he's written a sequel in the last few years of The Act of Marriage After 40. That's a really good one. But there are a lot of really good books written in this whole area of Christian sexual values that couples need to read together and work it through. Yep.
Why is it that, like after sex, a male can, afterwards feel emotionally connected, whereas a female can't? I mean, I understand why a female can't because I'm a female, but I don't get how after sex, how you can then feel emotionally intimate or more emotionally connected than beforehand.
Yeah, so how you can feel more emotionally, intimately connected after intercourse than before. Someone else like to answer that rather than me always giving the answers?
Yeah, I think because you're sort of winding down again and you just sort of like to feel that closeness. You still want to feel connected still.
So physical closeness is pretty much tantamount to emotional closeness.
For a male.
It's physical closeness, yes.
Yeah.
Probably.
And after the release of the built-up tension of the sex, all the testosterone building up, and then often some males do like that time to just hold their wife and be close to her, because it's a way of expressing how they feel emotionally that they can't say it. It's much more physical than what a wife is, a woman is, for most men. On the other hand, some men just roll over and go to sleep. So probably depends on, the variety. But even that, even that wives can tell their husbands that that's the times that's special to them as well, where they like to just be held. And so to build that intimacy after the sex act as well. So males are trainable, they really are, they're teachable. Yeah.
In fact, I think males probably want to discuss issues after they've made love. Probably.
Yeah, well, according to the studies, they can think clearer at that point because the pressure's gone.
That was large truck.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so then some of the things we've learned out of this unit is you need to say to your husband, we got to talk, have a good sex session, and then he's open to listen to being able to talk. Where there's a will, there's a way. Okay, conclusions. Sorry? Yeah.
If a man has had associations in the illegal way, and when that happens, evil spirits get into you.
Yes.
Sex.
Yes.
Illegal sex, not godly.
Yes, so when a man, let me repeat it.
Later he has an association, he finds a partner and gets married. So all those evil spirits that are in him can be transmitted to the wife, isn't it?
Well, Paul said, who you join yourself to. If you join yourself to a prostitute, you become one with her. So yes, you become one. To mess around before you get married for males and females.
And check him out.
That's true.
Otherwise you might,
You inherit a lot of his baggage. That's true.
What evil
This
spirits
is what Peter Holman talks about.
in prostitutes?
Yes.
Yes.
Even, yes.
No, that is if he had associations before he finds the partner, his past, then he can have a lot of evil spirits in him.
If he hasn't dealt with it.
If he hasn't dealt with it.
Yes. And if he doesn't know about it, he can't deal with it if he doesn't know.
Or if he wants to keep him and enjoy him. So.
Or he can lead a double life.
Or leads a double life.
And the poor wife wouldn't know that she'll be getting all that stuff into her.
Now that's all the issues for counseling. How about, let's go on to conclusions. We did conclusions, didn't we? Yes, so turning our differences into partnership is possible. Well, there's seven things there that if you get some time to pray through, is very important. That gives you some more ideas to jump into for male-female things. And I also put a puzzle on the back page. Let's just turn over that real quick. If we'd had time, it would have been fun just to sat with partners and worked it through. Some people enjoy doing this. Some people don't enjoy this. So don't look at the answer yet. Just have a quick look at which one. So the first pattern, that's the one that if you put it together as a box, is your sample pattern. So you need to sort out in all 4 of those rows which one, if any, in those rows will make the pattern. So just take a quick moment and do that without looking at the answer.
It'll take you about 4 hours.
So then if you've got it, look down in the answer, it's 1B. In row 2, it's number D. In row 3, it's number C. And in the last row, row 4, none of them match the image. Now, most women would say, I'm not even going to bother about this. It's too complicated.
Doesn't matter.
That doesn't, exactly, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Too late and it doesn't matter. Yes, and if you could do that with children, yeah, it would probably be easier. Yeah, good. Okay. Now, it's been my pleasure, ladies and gentlemen. It's been my pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to present this unit. I've learned a lot in doing it as well. It's a completely different rewrite to the unit I did last year in this whole area. We've tried to make it a lot more gender differences in this than the one that we did last year. So I know it's very, very unusual in a church to be talking about these sort of things, particularly to be talking about sex. But I know, like we've already said, how important it is and how much I would like to see it happening more and more for younger couples before they get into the marriage relationship. This ought to be part of pre-marriage counseling to talk about these sort of things so that wives can learn the difference of how their husband thinks from them and to somehow work in the partnership with them rather than to beat each other's throats and the whole thing. So I have enjoyed this. Next week we start unit, what are we up to, 16? And Daniel's going to come and talk about marriage prep. So he will talk about some of the things that couples need to learn before they go into marriage. Then he'll be talking about the Bible's definition for separation and divorce and how different it is from the common secular idea that if you get divorced, you automatically have a right to go get married again. That's not quite the Bible position. So Daniel will be doing Enhancing Relationships starting next Thursday for the next 5 weeks. And then it's only a couple of weeks after that until Christmas, a couple of weeks after that till the year 2002. Wasn't that an amazing, quick year?
Will we be doing prayer counseling too?
And on Tuesday night, yes, Tuesday night we'll be doing prayer counseling number 2.
I'm going to jump there.
Help yourself. Prayer counseling 2 involves a little bit more emotional release and inner healing and what people call theophostic, if you've run across that. So that's on Tuesday nights. Yes. Okay, how about I pray for you and then let's call it quits. Well, Lord Jesus, this has been a fascinating topic for all of us. And Lord, I pray that you put your seeds of what you want each one of us to remember. That, Lord, help our minds and our heart to hang on to what it is that you have told us out of this unit, of what you have applied to each one of us. I ask a rich blessing on each person's life here. Help each one of us to allow you to show us what you regard as our body image, a healthy body for each one of us. And Lord, help us to learn to live in this body that Father God has made for us, because it's the only one we have. Ask your blessing, your peace, your protection, and your continued teaching for each one of us, Lord. In your precious name. Amen. Okay, hopefully see most of you next week.